Hello everyone, thanks very much for having me. So I've got the evening slot and I'm going to educate you a little bit about our family business. Eleanor Meade is my name. Our family business is Meade Farm. We're based in County Meade, so Meade for Meade. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about how this crop of potatoes can miraculously turn into potato starch. I wish it was that simple, so I'll rewind a fraction. Tell you a little bit about the company and how the evolution of the consumer led us to this opportunity and this innovation. And obviously we found solutions, but also there was some byproducts. So every time there's an opportunity to innovate and to do so in a sustainable manner, you usually find out that when you've done one project, there's actually byproducts as a result of that project as well. So a little bit on the future. So the first picture you see up there is a picture of my mum and dad. Very simple story. My dad inherited 5 acres of land and a cottage in the Boyne Valley region, and he basically converted those acres into potatoes. He was a man with a van, a blue van, and he went door to door selling potatoes to the local shops. In 1982, my mum and dad incorporated the company and called it Meade Potato Company. And that was kind of the start of how we were kind of moving from door-to-door shops to kind of chip shops to army contracts and kind of expanding a little bit. This point in 1996 kind of brought us right back a number of years. So what happened in the mid-90s was there was a surplus of potatoes in Ireland, and there was no avenue, there was no market for them. So what we actually did was we were the first company to export by the boatload potatoes to Europe. And the reason that there was a need for potatoes in Europe was because of they had a lack of potatoes for starch, they had a lack of potatoes for frozen chips, and believe it or not, for potato vodka. So plenty of streams that you can get out of the humble spud. So you'll leave after these few minutes knowing a lot about potatoes. In 2019, we introduced the first paper 100% compostable form-filled potato bag. And in the year 2020, I will let you know what happened and how we actually got the potatoes into starch and what the process was. So this is the wee cottage. It was upgraded in the 80s, and this is the one store. This picture was taken in 1983. Definitely wouldn't be allowed today. There's a silage pit beside the packaging store. So my dad was into livestock at the time as well. Our packaging store was the little blue container, and you can't just see it, but behind is a field where the actual labour of picking potatoes happened, long before harvesters and modern technology came in. So I remember getting £10 for a potato box, and it would take you all day to fill it. So where we are today then is this plant. So this circle is the original store, and what you see to the entire right-hand side there is the entire potato world, I call it. Everything that happens related to potatoes happens there. And to the left-hand side, we progressed into the fruit and vegetable market as well. You can barely see just the bottom of our wind turbine, so that helped us in terms of energy and putting energy back into the company to being able to be as sustainable as we possibly can. We're looking also to upgrade that in time. So in terms of what we actually do ourselves, we are growers. We grow obviously potatoes, specialising, but also we grow carrots, we grow onions and brassicas. But we also source and supply the full range of fresh produce. We're packers, so we pack anything and everything you can think of from a fresh produce point of view. And we're distributors. We distribute to the retailers nationwide. The last angle and arm of our business is service providers. So those that mightn't have the packing equipment but still want to deal with retailers, we also provide that service too. So if you like, our kind of big break came where we, if you like, weren't the middleman anymore, and we got an opportunity to deal direct with retailers. And what that led to is, okay, you can produce potatoes, can you produce vegetables, can you produce... So we do a full range of potatoes, vegetables, organics, fruit, and salads as well, all the way to the retailers. So, what happened and why did we get into the whole situation regarding circular economy? And really a lot of it came from my dad, who really just hated waste. It was an Irish guilt of waste when things was tight a long, long time ago and food was, scarce. It was one of those things that it seemed to him a crying shame to see good food go to waste. So he contacted St Vincent de Paul in the early 90s and said, listen, I have some surplus potatoes, what can we do with them? They pointed us to Crosscare, and we began a relationship there where some of our potatoes would go to the food banks, mainly in Dublin area. We did a lot in relation then with Food Cloud, with Feed the 5,000 over the years, and a lot of what we do fed right into the Origin Green Plan. But I suppose years ago when sustainability wasn't a buzzword, it was sort of ingrained in us. It was part of our DNA. It was part of every decision that was made at the kitchen table is, what are we doing? Is it sustainable? Is it a good decision? And usually sustainability comes at a price, and sometimes we don't talk about that. So there's always that investment that you have to think really clearly about. Is it worth it? Is it going to have an end effect that will actually be good for the environment? So that led us to the fact that the consumer had changed a lot. So I don't think it's kind of captured there as well as I'd like it, but in the 80s, big families, it was a 25 kilo bag of potatoes that was bought, usually in paper and usually unwashed. Fast forward, and families became smaller, and the need for that big bag of potatoes was no more. So what you're looking at there is really a 2.5 kilo bag, which is probably our most saleable item, is that actual kilo. We supply to the retailers, so it's an awful lot of own brands, so you probably wouldn't see the Meade brand out there. But what happened was that change of shift between washed and unwashed and paper to plastic meant that there was a huge amount of waste. And that was where we kind of had to follow through with it and see, well, how much is the waste and what effect it has. So these boxes up here represent potato boxes, and anything up to 20 to 30% of a typical crop at our farm would be deemed not fit for purpose for the market. So you could be looking at an odd blemish, it could be odd looking, odd shape, and it could be a little bit wonky. It could have a little bit of mechanical damage. So what happens with those 30% is technically they would have went straight to animal feed. And that was where we found this was hard to take. If you're looking at a tractor and trailer going by and it's heading for animal feed and you know that potato is absolutely perfect, you just peel away the imperfections. So that led us to, if you like, working towards a zero food waste policy at Meade Farm. So the first thing that we started doing recently, which is, if you see the stock channel feed, you'll see it's like number 5 now on the list, whereas years ago it was like the natural place where it went to. So what we do is we work at gleaning the fields from farm gate level. So literally as soon as the harvester comes out, there is carrots and potatoes left just by default due to the machinery that's been used. So we have a lot of corporate groups that come out to us where they actually glean the fields, they fill cratefuls of potatoes, carrots, onions, brassicas, and we put them in a van and we send them down to Food Cloud. So that's kind of at a farm gate level. That kind of wasn't thought of. It was done years ago, kind of a biblical term in America more so, but it's becoming more and more popular in Ireland. Then we would grade out the first grade for our retailers, and then anything we can peel away from an imperfection point of view, but still be excellent, then that's your prepared foods business. And then we would donate to Food Cloud. Then you've got stock feed. And we do a lot of fruit, so if there is any waste in relation to that, but perfectly fine, but can still be used in juices. And then lastly is the starch project. So when we started this about 3 years ago, we were like, what can we do with this 30%? This was our problem. But it wasn't just our problem, because there's 500,000 tonnes of potatoes grown in Ireland every year. We bring to market between 45 and 50,000 tonnes. So we're just one person, if you like, in the chain in the whole of Ireland. And we undertook an innovation engineering programme. And really all that means in really simple terms is fail fast and fail cheap. So you use your desk research, you use Google, you use a few websites and so on, and you see where could we go here, what's others doing, is there an opportunity here. So at one stage we were doing animal feed, nuts about spuds. That we learned through testing and trialing in the kitchens and so on, that it had a low shelf life and also a low value. So then we moved to starch, and we said, how much are we importing into Ireland every year? Is it a lot? Is it not a lot? So when we moved to the starch, so above is my dad and my two brothers. So I was kind of challenged with this about 10 years ago. They were like, I worked in accountancy and financial roles. They were like, can you come back? Can you help us? We just want to be on the farm and we want to do the trade aspect. And then they were like, can you do everything else? So I was like, that's not easy. So they were like, we need to come up with ideas. So we hired an R&D graduate, and we worked on a number of items. And the one thing that we found was that there was no starch extraction plant in Ireland. And there was no native starch extraction plant in the UK and Ireland, where most of the European counterparts or competitors would be growing potatoes directly for starch, whereas we wouldn't be. We wouldn't be adding to any waste. We would be looking at utilising this 30% that I'm talking about, but also for the farming industry in the whole of Ireland. If there was a distressed crop, we all know the weather, we've stormed today, we all know what that can do to a crop. It can be soul destroying. So to only have one avenue of stock feed, it just seemed like a crying shame. So now that we can take in not just our own crops, but the whole of Ireland, it gives everyone an opportunity to get 100% value off the potato, not just 70%. So the starch plant itself behind you is very automated. It costs a lot of money, and we were kind of launching around the time that kind of COVID hit. So it was and it's also a new product in Ireland, if you like, from a sustainability point of view. The equipment itself, so it goes through 22 stages. 1 hour it goes from a potato to starch. 102 knives, and all kind of very high-end equipment to make sure that it works and works really, really quickly. Believe it or not, it takes about 5 to 8 tons of potatoes to make 1 ton of starch. So that's the statistic. So you can see, for us to produce on our factory, we're looking at around 2,500 this year of end product starch. So multiplying that up by 5 and 8 is a lot of potatoes that we're able to reuse into the circular economy, if you like. So what you're looking at there on the left-hand side is a 25 kilo bag, and that is destined for the food service. So starch and potato starch is somewhat an imported product, and quite a lot of it. So when we did our research back in 2019, we realised that 65,000 tonne was imported to the UK and about 5,000 into Ireland, so that's 70,000. But when we also did our research, we seen it was really, really growing market, 9 to 10% year-on-year growth every year. So there was a business there waiting for us to reduce carbon footprint and to be able to supply the Irish suppliers first and foremost to have that sustainability story rather than importing in the potato starch. The 25 kilo goes a lot to food service. Potato starch itself is a thickening, so chefs are raving about it. They're like, they've ditched corn flour, they're using this a lot, and that's evidenced by the sales that we're experiencing. And really it's a fabulous thickening for sauces, soups and stews, but it's also a binding agent, and that binding agent for the likes of burgers and the meat industry, and there's also, like, it goes into straws. It's also part of the pharmaceutical industry as a binder for tablets. So the uses of potato starch is just huge, and we're learning more and more as we go along as well. Moving on to kind of the byproduct of starch that we realised is that the fact that we're producing a lot of pulp. So we are currently going through testing at the minute to see, can we use pulp in our pulp punnets and actually sell our packaging, sell our fresh produce in some of the packaging that we actually use, and use the starch to produce the pulp packaging. So that is one of those things that is coming up. So watch this space. And then just kind of to bind it all together, the valorisation is the key point. We're trying to utilise 100% of the crop. This 30% that we weren't able to means that we now can. It's a brand new market for potatoes, and it's a unique, useful branded product. So it's probably the first time that we're in a position to, for the first 3 years we said we'd hit food service, and this year we launched in Bloom as a retail pack. And it's just been really, really fabulous, the feedback. It's in Tesco and in Aldi at the minute. And people are picking it up as an alternative because they see it it's a gluten-free, so from a gluten-free bacon point of view. For coating, air fryers are very popular at the minute, so people are coating their chicken and they're putting it on it. It's in all their soups and stews and so on. So from that end of things, it's given us the opportunity, if you like, to put Meade Farm on the map in the retailers, as opposed to being in an own brand as well. So that's a good aspect to the business. Import substitution, I mentioned the figures, and it really is just a really good import substitution story. But it's not just for ourselves, it's for the entire farming industry in Ireland. So I know we mentioned earlier about an agricultural food example of on the ground what's actually happening. It's an example of what is actually happening on the ground, and a couple of years of research that went into it. And then in relation to innovation engineering, so that kind of opened a lot of our brain cells into thinking that we need to think a little bit more simpler. Not complicate processes, and the whole idea of kind of failing fast, failing cheap is something that we've definitely taken literally, and making sure that we kind of move on from projects to projects. So that's kind of our circular economy example of a story in the agri-food industry. So I just wanted to thank you very much for listening. All right.